Hi friends! What would happen if you didn't eat breakfast for 30 days? You'll probably lose weight, especially visceral fat, and melt your fatty liver. Now, if you do it right, you will have practiced time-restrictive eating, which has been shown to help people lose weight, lose visceral fat, and improve their insulin resistance. And just by skipping one meal, your breakfast, you can effectively flip your metabolic switch, go from burning glucose to ketones without going on a strict ketogenic diet. Interested? There is a right way to do it where you can activate autophagy to revitalize your mitochondrial health. But first, let's explore the concept of just skipping a single meal. Why breakfast? Is it more effective to maybe skip lunch or dinner? Would you get the same results? And why do people even eat 3 meals a day? Now, if you're a history buff, you'll know that 3 meals a day is actually a modern invention. That didn't come until the invention of the light bulb. So we are actually eating against our natural circadian rhythm, which is our biological clock. And whenever you go against nature, nothing good will result. So between breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which one do you think is a more natural way to eat? I'll let you think about that and answer that question a little later. I'll give you a hint. Understanding human behavior through ancient civilizations can probably help you understand what was normal eating times. Now, the ancient Romans, they didn't start eating until noon. That was their breakfast. And in fact, they only ate 1 meal a day. Of course, the Roman Empire collapsed. Now, during the Middle Ages, people didn't eat until after morning mass, which was sometime between 6 to 11 a.m. Pope Francis had his Sunday mass at 10 a.m. Now, if you waited till after the mass given by the late Pope Francis, that is what we call lunchtime. But if that was your first meal to break your fast, that is actually technically your breakfast. But the Middle Ages was plagued with bubonic plague, violence, and war. And our modern breakfast, as we know it, became a thing due to aristocrats. They ate like that during the 18th century. And it wasn't until the 19th century, in which laborers needed energy to work during the American Industrial Revolution, did breakfast become a meal for the working class. Not surprisingly, government propaganda promoted breakfast to be the most important meal a day in the early 20th century. Now, were they right? The answer is not so simple, because a meal is important for 3 reasons: the quality of the food, the timing of the food, and your physical activity to work off that food. For example, if someone were to wake you up in the middle of the night and give you this bagel or an ice cream sandwich, do you think that would actually be a healthy thing to do? Most people would say not. And in fact, if you ate like that in the middle of your sleep, or even a healthier meal, you'll notice that you're gonna have more belly fat, and over time, you're gonna have a beer belly. Your metabolism just can't handle food when you're supposed to be sleeping. Our body expects to process food during the daytime with sunlight, and during nighttime, we're supposed to be sleeping, not eating. And this is why night shift workers or people who eat late at night tend to have more visceral fat and insulin resistance and be at higher rates of diabetes. I'm sure as a parent, your kids have cried in the middle of the night. It's hard to get yourself up and wake up and be attentive and patient, isn't it? That's because your body was expecting to sleep. Your metabolism is the same way. Your body wants to be on a schedule. And when you're on a schedule, you're just more productive. If your metabolism knows what to expect, it'll be more productive too. This is your circadian rhythm. Your body expects to eat when the sun is out and rest when the sun is down. So when you do things out of the normal times, then your metabolism struggles. It's confused. So between breakfast and dinner, they can both be healthy if you eat them both during the daytime. But too many people eat dinner far too late. This is why following a strict eating time is critical in maintaining your metabolic health. The invention of the light bulb has really confused our circadian rhythm. We have trained ourselves to stay up longer than we should, resulting in odd eating times. And I know it's not just me, because I see everybody's metabolic health suffering. And skipping breakfast for 30 days could be a good idea to help revitalize your metabolic health. In reality, redefining the timing of what you know breakfast should be. Now, back in the Industrial Revolution, people worked physical jobs for 6 hours by noontime. By eating breakfast, Before they worked, they effectively worked off those calories for the day. Today, most people don't have physically active jobs anymore. The body part that's most physically active are their fingers typing. People used to walk or bike to work and walk upstairs. Most people in America are in their cars or they take elevators. These lifestyles don't need as many calories. We don't need 3 meals a day. Now let's talk about food quality. The American breakfast. Now, if you traditionally eat American breakfast, your options fall into 2 camps, the carb camp or the fat camp. So if you're a carb camper, your ideal breakfast option are bagels, maybe a donut, Pop-Tart, bowl of cinnamon toast cereal, or pancakes with syrup. These are essentially dessert foods, and the amount of sugar is so overwhelmingly sweet. And I remember chatting with some girls at the checkout stand where they talked about how their European trip was so fabulous, but they couldn't stand European desserts because they had no taste. They couldn't taste the sugar. We as Americans have a warped taste of sugar because our sugar palates are so heavy. And then when American travels to Asia or Europe, they can't taste their desserts because they don't put as much sugar in their desserts. They actually put real fruit, and you're supposed to taste the flavors of the fruit. The only way to reset your sugar palate is to stop eating sugar. And 30 days of no breakfast can help you do that. And when you go back to eating those traditionally sweet American breakfast options, you'll notice that they will be overpowerfully sweet. Now, the second camp is a high-fat camp full of processed meats like bacon and breakfast sausage. Now, did you know that this was also the result of Big Food advertising during the 1920s? Big Food wrote to 5,000 physicians to ask them which they preferred, a heavy breakfast or a light breakfast. They voted for a heavy breakfast, and so they published the marketing findings, and the rest is breakfast history, cementing the breakfast bacon and sausage for people's palates. Now let's set these 2 breakfast camps aside and look at their metabolic consequences. Camp 1 is a refined carb camp. These foods are filled with sugar or refined starches that will turn straight to sugar, which then will turn straight to fat, unless you are working it off that same day. Now, you may not believe that this bagel is as bad as a donut. They both probably have the same amount of calories if you get about the same size. But the bagel may look like it's low in fat, but are they really? Have you seen how much cream cheese people lather on bagels? Many bagels often end up to be more caloric than their donut counterpart for the same size because they are denser and bigger. Now, we've been told to build our diets based on complex carbohydrates, and a bagel and a donut both fills this definition. Technically, many of these starchy breakfast foods are made out of complex carbohydrates, and they fill the Camp 1 palate. But why are complex carbohydrates bad when we've been told that they are good? Because we're simply overeating them. Complex carbohydrates turn into pure sugar starting in your mouth. So your saliva gets more acidic due to your bacteria in your mouth. This is how you get cavities. It can quickly turn into sugar in your mouth. Imagine how quickly it can turn into sugar in your gut. The majority of this bagel will turn into sugar when it hits your gut. And if you aren't physically active using up this energy, that sugar gets stored as fat. Your body has an unlimited ability to store your carbohydrates into fat when you eat more than you physically need. Now, have you ever visited Switzerland? Switzerland is a top 5 longevity country, and they eat a lot of complex carbohydrates, but probably not like this. My son has a good friend who is from Switzerland, and I told him he needs to cut down on breads and pastries because it is causing him to gain weight. And he stared at me dumbfounded because that is what every Swiss eats. There are bread and pastry stores on every street corner, and everyone is eating those things for breakfast as they're walking to work. And he's right. There are very few people who are obese in Switzerland. And at present, their life expectancy is 82.2 years for men and 85.8 years for women, which is almost 10 years longer than the average American. They have much lower diabetes rates, and only 12% of their population was obese as of 2022. But let me read you what is in our American bagel. All right, it is enriched wheat flour. That means it's enriched with vitamins, so it's not a whole grain. It has sugar, water, yeast, salt, wheat gluten, calcium propionate and sorbic acid, corn grits, guar gum, monoglycerides, citric acid, soy, lecithin, and sesame seeds. So you think you're getting complex carbohydrates, but you're actually getting a lot of other chemicals.
Hi friends, I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
And if you read the quality of what the Swiss put in their bread, it comes nowhere close to the laundry list of ingredients that we have in our bread. They also prefer to eat more whole grain foods. This food quality makes a huge difference in your metabolism because you can fool your eyes and your brain, but you can't fool your metabolism. The Swiss define obesity to be a BMI of over 30, just like we do in America. And do you know why they're not obese? Number one, they are walking or biking everywhere. Their people move all day long out of necessity. The country is too small, so they can't own cars like Americans, where one family can own 5 cars parked in their driveway. The average Swiss walks 8,000 steps a day. The average American walks less than 3,000 steps a day. In 2017, 42.4% of Americans were obese, and that's not including those who were overweight, which is 30.7%. This means over 72% of our population may be unfit to serve in our military, unless you are enrolling in the sumo military. But even sumo wrestlers are trained athletes. The majority of America barely walks 3,000 steps. To burn an average donut breakfast or even the calories of this bagel, you're going to have to walk at least 5,000 steps. And I didn't just look up the data on Swiss statistics. I actually visited Switzerland last year. The Swiss look to me like the body proportions that I saw in America growing up. I walked a lot in Switzerland. These are some of my steps in just 1 week in Switzerland. That number, 26,712 steps, is in 1 day. And I'm sure if you went to Disneyland, you would walk that many steps in 1 day. How many people just eat this when they go to Disneyland? They're eating a bunch of junk all day long. And that's why people end up more tired and sore the day after. Poor quality calories do not make up for the nutrients that are missing in the typical American diet. Now, I burned a little over 1,000 calories walking 26,000 steps. A typical restaurant meal in America can have about 1,000 calories. So if you only walk 3,000 steps, you would barely use up any of the calories that you consumed in your takeout. Hence, America is accumulating excess calories because we're just eating too much for our modern lifestyles. And there are 2 ways to address this calorie deficit. You either change your food quality so that you stop eating food like this, or you eat less food overall. Some people have given up carbohydrate-filled diet and swapped their refined carbohydrate for a high-protein animal meat diet like bacon and sausage. So what would happen if you ate for breakfast bacon and sausage every day? You wouldn't actually lower your calories, and sometimes you may even raise your calories. What you will do is make it more difficult for your body to metabolize carbohydrates. And this is because the saturated fat in the bacon and the sausage inhibits carbohydrate metabolism. This actually makes physiological sense. If you think about it, these are 2 ways in which the body can get energy. And in nature, you don't want to duplicate itself. It's wasting energy. You don't want to have redundant ways to do the same thing. So if you have a lot of energy with fat floating around, that means you really don't need to access quick energy, right? You're in a state of abundance. Carbohydrates are for quick energy. These are for sprinters. And when you want to go from sprinting from a tiger to just lounging around and maybe storing some for the next day, then you want to switch off your carbohydrate metabolism. Your body is very efficient in generating energy from carbohydrates. But when you have fat around, that is a signal to your metabolism that you really don't need to use carbohydrates anymore, that you can save it. Fat gives you more ATP energy. But the problem is you can't directly use fat as energy. It needs to be processed into ketones. So then your body then can use the ketones as an energy source. Hence, there's an extra step to go through. So fat energy conversion isn't as quick. You need different enzymes for that. And when your body is in homeostasis, it doesn't want to make a bunch of enzymes that it doesn't need. But when there's fat around, especially excess fat in your breakfast, then that's a signal that your body can now store this glucose into fat. You can rest the glucose metabolism factory. Unfortunately, if you're still eating carbohydrates, you still need to use this up or it goes directly into fat. So you can imagine having conflicting signals, right? You're giving yourself food, but the body is storing it as opposed to using it. And as a result, when you eat this, your blood sugar rises, then insulin rises. And the higher the insulin, the more fat you will store. Now, if you don't eat the carbohydrates, then you will never see this phenomenon because you need to eat sugar to have high blood sugars. And when you do this, when you combine the fat and the sugars, you will have persistently high blood sugars after the 2-hour mark. And this doesn't just happen to people with diabetes. This actually happens to normal people. In fact, they tested this in a group of training physicians, and they split them into 4 camps. One camp ate really nothing for 2 days. One camp ate a high protein diet. One camp ate a high carbohydrate diet full of refined carbohydrates, and one camp ate a high fat diet, like a ketogenic diet. And the people who had the highest blood sugars were the people who actually, number one, didn't eat anything because then they were mobilizing their own fat stores, or it was the people who ate the high fat diet. And this is why when you skip breakfast for 30 days, you can begin to reverse your insulin resistance, lose that visceral fat, and most importantly, reset your taste palate so that when you do restart breakfast again, you can gravitate for whole foods that won't taste as good as refined foods, especially the salty, fatty kind. But that is the key to long-term success to any diet, is to redefine what tastes good to your palate. And honestly, until you clear that palate and appreciate natural whole foods, foods with better quality, then it'll be very, very difficult to give up these highly processed carbohydrates and meats. Skipping the modern breakfast is really not a big deal, especially if you have a sedentary job. I've skipped breakfast now for decades because I realized my job is semi-sedentary. On a given day at work, I only walk roughly less than 6,000 steps. That doesn't allow me much room to be eating and drinking desserts for breakfast and pretending that it's good for me. The reality is we have an epidemic rise of fatty liver, which is a disease of carbohydrate excess. There are conditions that trigger fatty liver. Number one is alcohol. Classically, fatty liver was only seen in those who abused alcohol. In fact, as a young physician, it was very rare that we would have a patient with cirrhosis from fatty liver who never ever drank. We assumed it was from their herbal supplements, but now we know that many of those patients had fatty liver from excess carbohydrate. There is one carbohydrate that is a potent driver of fatty liver, concentrated fructose, which is a known mitochondrial toxin. So whenever you eat added fructose, whether that's honey, agave, table sugar, or high fructose corn syrup, or fruit juice concentrate, you're getting a known mitochondrial toxin in concentrated form. And if you gave me a choice between a plain bagel versus a glazed donut, that glazed donut would be more toxic to my liver because of the oil and the added sugar that has fructose. Well, when we talk about alcohol leads to fatty liver, just like excess fructose leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver. They both share very similar common pathways. They're both mitochondrial toxins that impair fat metabolism. If you're gaining weight, your mitochondria are getting sicker. They're getting impaired. There's a toxin in your diet. When that happens, your metabolism slows down. Breakfast has become a sea of mitochondrial toxins. Fructose syrups, sugar, saturated fats. Think about our population and how it has transformed its overweight and obese people in which now we can't even recognize. We think they are normal size. We didn't start getting this size until the last 50 years, which just so happens to parallel the rise in high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is a well-known liver toxin. Sucrose is a table sugar with fructose. Half of it is fructose. While fructose may seem to provide energy, it actually depletes energy in the short term due to the ATP consumption, and it promotes fat storage. This leads to chronic energy imbalances. Now, for your biochemistry gurus, I'm going to go into the weeds for a little bit. And for those of you who don't like biochemistry, I appreciate your patience. When fructose enters the liver, it is rapidly phosphorylated by the enzyme fructokinase, which uses ATP, the liver cell's energy currency, to convert fructose into fructose 1-phosphate. This step depletes ATP for the liver and intracellular phosphate stores. As ATP is consumed, it generates uric acid, which is a waste product, which further impairs mitochondria. Fructose generates more uric acid compared to other sugars like glucose because of the excessive ATP consumption and purine metabolism it triggers. This makes fructose a very unique stressor on energy metabolism. Uric acid itself directly impairs mitochondrial function by promoting oxidative stress. It inhibits the activity of mitochondrial enzymes involved in energy production, such as aconitase and the citric acid cycle. What's even worse is that uric acid decreases the expression of PPAR gamma coactivator 1 alpha, a key regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis. This means you don't form any new mitochondria. So now you have sick mitochondria with less new mitochondria. And over time, your mitochondrial population keeps dwindling. Uric acid interferes with the mitochondria's ability to oxidize fatty acids. This forces the body to store fats rather than burn them for energy, contributing to fat accumulation and metabolic disorders like obesity and insulin resistance. Furthermore, uric acid inhibits endothelial nitric oxide synthase, reducing nitric oxide levels. Nitric oxide is critical for vascular health and glucose uptake by cells. This contributes to reduced blood flow and impaired insulin signaling, both of which exacerbate insulin resistance. High uric acid levels also trigger inflammation in tissues like the liver and adipose tissue. Chronic inflammation worsens insulin resistance and accelerates the development of metabolic syndrome. Fructose metabolism produces reactive oxygen species that further damages mitochondrial membranes, proteins, and DNA, compromising their ability to generate energy efficiently. On top of all that, the products of fructose metabolism, such as glyceride 3-phosphate and dihydroxyacetone phosphate, are shunted into pathways that create triglycerides or fats, leading to fat accumulation in the liver or fatty liver disease. So when you eat fructose, you get unchecked production of fat that accumulates in your liver, in your muscles. It impairs insulin signaling and promotes insulin resistance. Unfortunately, there is no limit to eating fructose, as it doesn't stimulate the release of insulin or leptin, a hormone that signals fullness to stop eating. Hence, after drinking your favorite soda, have you noticed that you're still hungry? And if you check your favorite coffee blend, they've probably spiked it with high fructose syrup for flavor. Fructose consumption increases levels of ghrelin, the hunger hormone, making you more likely to eat additional calories. Now, this all leads to a vicious cycle of overeating and gaining excessive weight. Excessive fructose leads to pot-belly guts or beer bellies, visceral fat accumulation, which is a key driver of metabolic syndrome, which includes obesity, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, prediabetes, or diabetes. Now, even though I just totally said fructose is a big problem, I meant added fructose. Fructose consumed when you eat natural foods is not. So when you eat a whole fruit that has fructose, that fruit has a fiber matrix. It is diluted in water. It's trapped in this fiber matrix that's all natural, that doesn't dissolve when it hits water. It's accompanied by antioxidants and essential vitamins and minerals to help your metabolism. The end result is that fructose is slowly released in such a small amount that your gut microbiome can metabolize quite a lot of it so that it may never enter into your bloodstream. And this is why a diet rich in whole fruit has been shown to help people lose weight, reverse insulin resistance, reduce their diabetes, improve their blood sugars, and it's healthy for people with gout, it's healthy for people with diabetes, and it's essential for people with fatty liver and for people who want to achieve longevity. But when you concentrate fruit juice, you are purifying fructose from nature, taking it out of its fiber matrix. And if you use it as an additive, that fructose, well, it's even more pure as a chemical. So when they squirt that fructose concentrate into your morning coffee, soda, added to your donut, ketchup, or barbecue sauce, or even some breads, that's like mailing a package wrapped in tissue paper and expecting that tissue paper to protect your package. It's not going to. Those foods have no food matrix. Honey, agave, fruit juice concentrates, and other natural sweeteners, they are also concentrated in fructose. These are not healthy sweeteners. If you look at the images of how an American looked in 1950 versus how people look now, it's fascinating that you couldn't see people who are morbidly obese. But yet, ancient cultures have had morbid obese people for eons. But it never became mainstream until we worked out essential nutrients and starting putting chemicals together and selling it off as food. Food additives put together and shaped into a recognizable form is not food. Food quality is a major difference between what people eat in Switzerland and what we eat in America. And as I mentioned, obesity is not a modern phenomenon. Ancient cultures worked out the science to create obese athletes. They're called sumo wrestlers. They figured out how to poison their mitochondria to make them morbidly obese. Drink alcohol, eat a bunch of fat and carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates. Sumo wrestlers, they drink beer and sake and wash their white rice noodle meals with their high-fat meats and their deep-fried foods. And if you think about it, alcohol and fructose, they share striking similarities in how they affect your mitochondria. After all, alcohol is a byproduct of sugar fermentation. And mitochondria, they are less able to produce ATP when they are damaged. This leads to a cellular energy crisis. So chronic alcohol consumption will reduce how many mitochondria you have, leaving your cells with less mitochondria, less energy to meet your demands. Alcohol, in addition, induces inflammation. That further damages your mitochondria and impairs insulin signaling, just like fructose. Those two chemicals are both exclusively metabolized by the liver, unlike glucose, which is metabolized by most tissues in your body. So eating complex carbohydrates, they haven't caused a nation of obese people until we started ultra-processing foods and started using chemical additives to manipulate the taste and textures of our food. And then we started concentrating those chemical additives, such as fructose, and then adding saturated fats and trans fats. When your mitochondria is sick, even this plain white bagel, even if it didn't have all these chemicals, can easily be turned into fat storage. Excess consumption leads to uncontrolled fat production. Hence, by skipping the most carbohydrate-filled meal of the day, especially with a bunch of saturated fat, you will have effectively given your body a break from the continued mitochondrial poisoning. This forces your own body to work and withdraw on your own energy stores, the fat stores that you've been saving for a rainy day. That rainy day should come now by skipping your breakfast. If you can give up added sugar, that also means the stuff in your morning coffee, you can more effectively reverse fatty liver. And if you do this within a 24-hour period, we call this time-restrictive eating. If you stretch your fasting to over 24 hours, then we call it intermittent fasting, which has its own risks and benefits. And intermittent fasting is not something you should do without medical supervision. If you think about it, how do donuts, bagels, muffins, or these carbohydrate-filled foods even become breakfast food? That sugary bowl of cereal, did they really have that in ancient Rome? I think Americans have given ourselves permission to eat dessert for breakfast. Have you ever wondered why American breakfasts are full of sugar and carbohydrates? That was to $1 trillion marketing ploy made up by big food. Turns out in the late 1800s, the first breakfast cereal, grape nuts and cornflakes, They were marketed as health foods by Kellogg and Post, but their sales are flat because they were bland. They didn't have enough sugar. So in the 1920s and 40s, sugar began to be added to these cereals, which made them more appealing, especially to children. And this was a major turning point. Marketing to young kids. In the 1950s, marketing of sugary cereals exploded with the introduction of characters like Tony the Tiger. Remember those Frosted Flakes? That came out in 1952. This era saw a major boom in child-focused sugary breakfast marketing. In the 1960s through the 80s, breakfast donuts, toaster pastries like Pop-Tarts, that was introduced in 1964. And then other breakfast items gained popularity, reinforcing the sugary trend. These kids are all grown up now. I was one of those kids. So by the 1980s, those sweet cereals and pastries, they were a norm in the average American household. I remember those toy prices. I bought those cereals for the toys at the bottom, which was some kind of dumb tattoo. And I never liked eating cereal because it always got soggy. I couldn't understand why people enjoyed that stuff. But it was mainstream. I saw commercials everywhere. Remember Mikey?
Let's get Mikey! Yeah! He won't eat it. He hates everything. He likes it!
And as adults, we are gravitating to foods that we liked as children, even though it's not healthy for us. And this is why if you skip breakfast for 30 days, you'll shed your visceral fat, you'll be lower in weight, you'll achieve better blood sugar control, revitalize your mitochondrial health, and start reversing your fatty liver. Now, the modern generation, they prefer to drink their morning breakfast, so they have a sugary coffee beverage instead. Have you seen the amount of added sugar and fat in those blended coffee drinks? It's a full meal of calories by itself. Now, I know some of you are hesitant to skip a meal because you think you're going to run out of energy. After all, eating food is what gives you energy. Well, you don't have to worry about that because your body has several built-in backups for energy. Your liver, your muscles, and your fat cells. You have hundreds of muscles, thousands of fat cells, but only one liver. And today, 1 out of 4 of you have fatty liver. 20% of those with fatty liver will get liver failure or cirrhosis. You can't live without the liver, hence its name. So this is why it's important to reverse fatty liver. And a great way to start reducing your fatty liver is to let your liver use up some of its energy stores. And you achieve this when you skip breakfast. During a food rest period of 8 to 12 hours, your body's blood sugar starts to drop and your insulin levels fall. And your body will start switching from glucose to fat as a preferred energy source. Now, some people choose to wait a little bit longer, between 12 to 16 hours. Fat burning significantly increases at this time, and the liver begins to mobilize stored fat for energy. And if you did an even longer food rest period, between 16 to 24 hours, deeper metabolic changes occur, including autophagy and further reducing the visceral fat in your liver and abdomen over time. These are all different types of time-restricted eating. But if you're on medications, then you need to make sure you check with your own medical doctor because you don't want to bottom out your blood sugars if your medications are preventing your natural compensatory mechanisms. It has been shown that if you can narrow the eating window, but not too narrow where it goes down to 1 meal a day, that it could be beneficial for your overall health. A lot of people, when they only eat 1 meal a day, that single meal oftentimes makes up for the calories of their skipped meals. They are overcompensating because they're so hungry. Whereas a healthier eating window is considered to be closer to 16-8, where 16 hours of no eating and 8 hours of eating. And just by doing this over 30 days, many people find that this is a very reasonable schedule to maintain for the rest of their lives. Let's face it, if you don't find a habit, a schedule, and you go back to your old ways, then you'll go back to your original starting point and gain weight. Diet is a lifestyle. It's not a short-term fix. And if you are one of those people who choose to fast more than 24 hours, that is not a sustainable lifestyle of eating. And as I mentioned, the goal is not to rapidly lose weight because there are risks associated with fasting too long. The greatest risks are electrolyte and water imbalances. So do not fast without first checking with your medical provider. And your medical provider should be giving you supplements when you're not eating food. There are many nutrients that you have to get on a daily basis that your body simply cannot make and cannot store. That's why they're called essential. And lacking those nutrients can get you into metabolic trouble quite fast. Another silent risk is muscle breakdown. People don't notice this, except that they have smaller appendages, like smaller, thinner legs and arms. And you may think that that's actually looking good, but that's actually destroying your muscle tissue. It's making you weaker. It's reducing your longevity. Muscle is a difficult organ to rebuild. It takes physical effort. So this is why I'm more of an advocate of time-restricted eating, like the 16 to 8 hour eating window. Now, if you don't eat for 16 hours, you could do that simply by skipping breakfast. Now, at first, it may seem nearly impossible not to eat for 16 hours. But if you think about it, let's say you sleep for 8 hours, and then you add a few hours before bedtime of not eating, and then after you wake up of not eating, then you can add up to 16 hours quite easily by splitting it before and after you sleep. And it's hard to hit that the first day that you try this. I don't always hit 16 hours a day. Sometimes I do 10, 12, 14, and 16. I alternate this, and that's okay. But what I do is I train myself not to eat immediately when I wake up. Now, some people will tell you that breakfast is the most important meal. And in fact, Walter Longo believes breakfast is a longevity meal, not to be skipped. And you are more insulin sensitive in the morning. So if you're going to eat carbohydrates, then breakfast is the best time to do it. But the reality is, breakfast is the first meal that breaks your fast. And if your meal is full of refined starch, like this bagel, donut, Pop-Tart, or cereal, then that is a food that promotes fatty liver. So this is why the first meal that breaks your fast should be quality food. Your food needs to be upgraded. Maybe whole oats, fresh fruits, beans, leafy greens. That's a typical breakfast eaten by Asians around the world. Asian breakfast has fiber. It has whole food complex carbohydrates. It has protein, lots of micronutrients that will trigger the right hormones to secrete leptin to signal that you are full. These foods keep your insulin low. And your first meal of the day, whether you want to call it breakfast or lunch, should include a diversity of whole plants, including beans, because they have a second meal effect, which means that they help to lower blood sugars in the subsequent meals. And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.